the next scale is work, and this just is a measure of your work ethic. Now, I think you all know, if you're looking to hire somebody, they can tell you, oh yeah, I'll work, I'll do whatever it takes, I'll work overtime, whatever. But then you hire them and you may be in for a surprise. So this tells you really what kind of work ethic the person has and how engaged they can be expected to be in the work that
How many questions on the profile?
Let me get to that afterward.
Okay,
Let me
sorry.
just finish the scale. The next scale is detail. And imagine a manager that has a really high detail score. They get too involved in the weeds. You have somebody else to take care of, or other people to take care of those details. You don't need to have that high of a detail
You want your
score.
mechanic to be a detail-oriented person, but not your manager.
Right, and you also want Dorothy to be into
Right,
details.
right.
When she's figuring out your taxes.
You're rubber hits the road guy, but not your overseer.
Yeah. So if you have a low score, a really low score, that indicates carelessness and an inability to attend to your work. So, even if you're not concerned about, really being attentive to details, you don't want to have a really super low score, because that kind of has to do with your work ethic and so forth. Let me just say at this point that, I think I mentioned this before, that even though, these scales look pretty straightforward, there's another aspect to this which has to do with the interplay of the different scales with each other. So that is why you have to really be trained to interpret this instrument, because there is so much more information that I can get from it other than just, the bars on each scale. Okay? Yes?
On this subject,
Mhm.
detail. So you have a person who starts at the bottom and is an accountant looking at detail, or an engineer, detail. Then they move up to a managerial position. You don't want them digging to the details. Now they're managing the work to make sure the whole system functions.
Yes, and,
So,
and you are
How
absolutely
do you
just
play with these two?
You're proving
situations?
my point as far as why it's so important to use this when you're either hiring or making a decision to promote somebody. Because the skills that help you to be really effective in a job are not necessarily the same skills that you need to be a manager.
The Peter
That's the
principle.
Peter principle,
Yeah.
that's exactly what I was
And it
thinking.
happens all the time,
Yeah.
that somebody gets promoted because, wow, I'm gonna get promoted and I'm gonna get more money, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I have to deal with people here, Gosh, that's the last thing I wanna do. So it really is important to do this, to see if somebody that you're considering really has the emotional intelligence to do what you're asking them to do. The next scale is change. And this really has to do with the ability to adapt to changing conditions. Now, if you get a low score on change, that means that you're going to be the kind of person that likes routine, predictable work. And, you might be a factory worker, or there's plenty of jobs that, even a server or flipping hamburgers or whatever. So you want work that, is not going to have a whole lot going on. If you have a moderately high score, then that means that you work a lot harder when the type of work you're doing offers change and variety. Also, if you have a high change score, it usually means that you tend to be more creative. Now, the next scale is courage. And let me say, this score and the next two scores are what we refer to as leadership indicators. So if you are looking to promote somebody to management, you want to really pay attention to this trio of scores. Because if somebody doesn't have relatively high scores on the three of these, they are probably not going to be able to manage or lead. We say, you can't really get a good spine transplant. It just doesn't happen. Either you have it or you don't have it in terms of these three scales. So let me talk about courage. It really has to do with your orientation to challenge. And demanding positions require a relatively high score. And these are the kind of people with the high scores that really do best with challenging and stimulating work. So direction measures your ability to size up problems and make independent decisions. Now, if you have a low score in direction, you're going to seek out advice. You're going to prefer making decisions as part of a group. If you have an extremely high score, not only can you make decisions, you want to make all the decisions. And if it's really, really high, like a 9 or a 10, you're probably going to be in the perfectionist range or, what's known as a control freak. So again, if you're hiring somebody for management, you don't want to hire somebody that has really, really high scores, or, they're going to not be such a good boss. Okay. So the next scale is assertiveness, and that's the third of the leadership trio. So assertiveness assesses somebody's capacity to make reasonable demands on people. It also measures your ability to be persuasive and to deal with conflict. So if you have a low score on assertiveness, you're going to have difficulty holding people accountable and just general difficulty managing people. If you have an extremely high score, this always indicates a very harsh, pushy, aggressive kind of style, and this kind of a person will damage relationships. My next scale is tolerance. If somebody has a very high assertiveness score paired with a very low tolerance score, they're going to be a very scary boss. And we've probably all had, or most of us have had, that kind of boss where they end up screaming at people in stairwells. That is just not somebody that you want to hire. If you have an extremely high tolerance score, you are patient and forgiving to a fault, and you're also going to have difficulty holding people accountable. You're going to be much too slow in that regard. If you have a low tolerance score, it means that you tend to exaggerate issues, you polarize them, you engage in splitting, which is like, you're on this side and the other person is on this side. You tend not to be able to see situations accurately, and as I say, if you pair high assertiveness with low tolerance, not a good thing for a boss. The next scale is consideration for others, and that just measures your empathy and your sensitivity toward other people. Now again, this is kind of job specific because, we want you to have some empathy. You don't want to hire a sociopath, so you have to have some empathy. But if you have way too much empathy, then you're really not going to, get your job done because you're going to be too worried about how people are feeling and, concerned about them. People that have a high empathy score tend to be people like therapists, social workers, teachers, nurses, those kinds of people, because that's their job, to have empathy. So, you want to have kind of a middle of the road score there. And on most of the scales, you're looking for a moderate middle of the road score, except for stress is probably the only exception. Sociability. This measures how comfortable you are with other people. Now, if a person is in crisis, such as I was, when I initially took this profile, they're typically going to have a very high score, like a 9 or a 10. And the reason for that is they're making an extra effort to be likable in order to avoid being judged. So that's another interesting facet of, this type of measurement is you can tell if somebody's in crisis. Now, what does that mean? Well, it may mean sort of what I was going through. It may mean that, actually they might be ill, like have uncontrolled diabetes or have depression or going through a divorce. It could mean lots of things that could be helpful for you to know if you're thinking of hiring or promoting somebody. Or another way that I use this is also in coaching. So you can see where that would be helpful. The last scale is sociability. Oh, I talked about that. Yes. If somebody has a very high score of sociability, now there are professions where you need to have that. If you are a receptionist or you are a salesperson, obviously you want to have a pretty high score. You want to be sociable. You want to be able to meet and greet. But if it's way, way high, then you're not going to get anything done. You're going to be socializing all the time. If you're a person who's like behind a computer, in a cubicle and you really don't interact with people, well then you can, have a pretty low sociability score. So that really depends on the kind of job that you're going. In a technical kind of job, like, with IT, or if you're an engineer or something like that, if you're gonna be promoted, you really do need to have some emotional intelligence, otherwise you're gonna really fall flat. And lack of emotional intelligence will derail somebody faster than anything else. People don't fail in management positions because they don't have industry knowledge. They fail because they don't know how to deal with